Good morning. As you're logging in, welcome, and hope to see many of you this morning. As you're doing so, why don't you go ahead and open up your chat pod and your Q&A pods. We're going to be using those all day, this whole hour together. And if you want to do polls, you can either download the app or go to the website that's on the screen. The chat pod is a one-way. We'll send you messages, links to the handout, stuff like that. The Q&A is how I'm going to ask for feedback, and I may ask you to raise your hands a couple of times. Got another minute or so, and then we'll get started. We'll give folks about 30 seconds to finish logging in. While you're doing so, if you would open up your Q&A pod, open up your chat pod, and be ready to take polls, either by downloading the app or get ready on the website. If you open up your chat pod here in about 10 seconds or so, Amanda and or Jody is going to drop, there we go, going to drop the link to the polls and the link to the handout so you don't have to type all those things in. Okay, and with that, we will get started. So good morning. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the Cornell Local Roads Program, where your New York State Local Technical Assistance Program, or LTAP, is the term you might hear. And today we're talking about traffic safety. Okay, so hopefully everybody can pick up one or two things, and we'll talk about some other things we're doing in the world of traffic safety right now. Now, if you haven't been on one of these before, you want to make sure you open up the chat and the Q&A. I may ask you to raise your hands. If you have audio issues, you can put those in the Q&A, and Jody and Amanda, who are in the background, will make sure and help you take care of that. And this is the second of our foundational webinars for the 24-25 season. You can see the ones listed that we're running through now and the end of the year. Though we'll be doing a whole bunch more in the rest of the winter and then some over the summer. And if you get the download of the handout, on the back side you can see the dates for all of the upcoming webinars, for the foundational ones, as well as some special ones we're doing. We're doing a series on road safety, primarily focused around the New York State Department of Transportation's Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan. And in fact, we have the last of 4 special webinars that we're doing on the improvements of curves this Thursday, so maybe we'll see some of you there. This particular webinar is worth 1 professional development hour for those who are registered here in New York State. It is counted as a course. If you're from outside New York State, which we're going to find out in just a second, you'll need to check with your LTAP center. Okay, so let's do a welcome. Before we get to a welcome, we can only do so much in an hour with traffic safety, so I just want to remind you that we have other things we will do on work zones and flagging and other safety things. But you may have seen in the news, well, there have been some interesting and some things that are a little scary. I don't know if you saw this on the news, where a vehicle did not pull over, even though that is the law, and it came very close to causing something much more serious than just a property damage only accident. But that's what happened in this case. I'll run that again. I want you to note 3 things. 1, luckily nobody was hurt. That's the best thing. Number 2, somebody had plenty of room to pull over and they didn't do so. And 3, notice the hard hat got knocked off. That's part of the reason we're looking at changing some standards for what you wear in a work zone. So there's something holding it on your head at all times. We'll talk more about that as we go through the winter. Now, let's find out who you are and where you're from. Who do you work for? Town, county, city, village, state or federal, tribal, MPO? Are you with a consulting firm? Are you a contractor? Are you just here working for the weekend? Let's see, we got a good variety today. Let's see, the only ones missing right now, we don't have anybody from the tribal side, and we don't have anybody who's a contractor. If you can't access the polls, you can throw that into the Q&A, and I can just add that to the pile in my brain. So we have a county person, a city person, we have a village/county person. So, okay, we can add that to the pile. That's a good mix. I like it. It's good to see. Okay, what is your job? Are you the Come on, wake up, computer. There you go. Are you the administrator? Are you the highway superintendent slash DPW commissioner or a deputy? Are you an engineer by trade? Are you a planner? Field crew, supervisor of that field crew? Are you a board member of some type, elected board member, or none of the above? And again, if you can't access the poll, you can put it in the Q&A. So we have a lot of engineers today, which is not surprising since there's a PDH. We have a planner or two, and we have a bunch of highway superintendents and commissioners. That's good to know. Okay, and the same with the Q&A. So now, last one of the three introductory ones. Where are you from? So you can just click right on the map and tell me where you're from. And we'll see, last time we did the safety one and then basics last week. Got some good variety of locations across the state. Okay, that's good to see. So we've got everything from Buffalo to Albany and Ithaca, the North Country, Long Island. Okay. North Syracuse, somebody put in the Q&A. We don't have anybody in Lake Ontario this week, so we've had people click Lake Ontario, but I'm not quite sure we get Wi-Fi out there, but hey, you never know. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about today is traffic safety. There's lots of resources that are available in the handout. The primary resource we're using today comes from our workshop on solutions for safer roads and streets. We will be holding that workshop in a few places around the state, so watch for that. We'll be launching the sign-ups in December. But that's where the primary source is, but there's other ones, including the Roadway Departure Safety Action Plan, but there, we'd like to see you on Thursday. Before we go too far, we've talked about this for years, but it's still worth reminding it. And we still use the term accident, but the term crash has become the more accepted term for what we're dealing with traffic safety. And why? Well, what we want to avoid is immediately going to the blame game. We really want to look at the incident and try to overcome that incident. So little ones, they have accidents. We're dealing with crashes. We can worry about fault later. Our primary role is, as engineers, as planners, as managers, as superintendents, is to figure out how to keep the crashes from occurring, especially the serious ones. Now, when it comes to crashes, we actually have to look at three issues. One is the probability the crash is going to occur. Two is the severity of the crash. And three is the exposure. That's the term that's used, but let's talk a little bit about these three things. Now, the probability is the likelihood, okay? And obviously, we know that like sharp curves, there's a higher probability of a crash. Like in this case, the probability people actually use the security gate is probably not 100%. Maybe they should have done something to make sure people actually had to use the security gate. Severity is another one, and we focused on the fatal and high serious injury crashes. Okay, we do that not because we don't want to stop all crashes, but we want to focus on the ones that are life-changing events. Now, here's the situation. This actually was a pretty severe crash, but it could have easily become a fatal. Amazingly, this person came around the corner in Nevada, hit the Jersey barrier, the K-rail, whatever you like to call it, literally flipped 180 degrees. And you're thinking they're having a bad day because they're going to the hospital with some serious back injuries. Now, it could have been a lot worse. So we're going to focus on trying to reduce and eliminate the serious crashes, okay? And then finally, there's exposure, okay? So raise your hand, get ready to raise your hand if you'd spend your money on the situation on the right before you spent your money on the situation on the left, improving the safety. How many would you fix the section on the right before you fix the one on the left? Let's see. Just a couple of you. Nope, here we go. A bunch of you. And at first blush, I agree with you completely. If you know nothing else, the one on the right is a 20 to 30 foot drop off down to a body of water, which we know has got its own issues. The one on the left, it's only a 4.5 foot drop into a ditch. However, the traffic volume on the right is less than 50 a day. The traffic volume on the left is over 12,000. And while we would like to spend money everywhere, we have to be cognizant of the fact we don't have unlimited funds. We might just delineate the one on the right and spend more money to improve the quality of that ditch and make it a little flatter, a little safer, because there's a lot more exposure that could still lead to a severe crash. And again, if we had several hours or in the workshop, we talk a little bit about the relationship between probability, severity, and exposure, but just keep these things in mind as we're thinking about improvements. So now, What does traffic safety mean to you? If you talk to somebody and you're talking and they go, "What do you do?" I'm in traffic safety. What do you tell them? What does that mean to you? What one word comes to mind? Let's see what you come up with. What does traffic safety mean to you? And again, if you can't access, you can always throw it into the Q&A. So reduce crashes, have a safe life. That's good. Safety. What's your elevator pitch? Trying to mitigate problems. Yeah, I like that. No accidents or crashes. Again, using the current term. It's proactive. I like that one. That's very good. We need to be more proactive with our crash issues. And we're trying to prevent crashes rather than waiting until they occur. Yep, I agree with those things. Less injuries, especially the severe ones. Okay. Safety. Okay. Again, something to think about. It's always good anytime you're thinking about a topic. What would you tell somebody in that elevator ride? They call it the elevator pitch for a reason. What would you tell somebody? And I really like that one right there. Everybody goes home every single day. Okay. Now, we'll come back to this, so we'll see what other answers y'all came up with later on. But let's talk a little bit about fatalities. In the United States, since COVID, fatality numbers are way up. Right before COVID, we were thinking we were going to get under 30,000 fatalities a year, and a similar reduction in the total number of serious crashes. Well, since we hit COVID, came out of COVID, those numbers have jumped. There are over 40,000 vehicles 40,000 people who've been killed annually, and over 1,000 here in New York State. So really, we need to start thinking about ways to get people back in some good habits, but also what we can do as managers and engineers on the highway system. Now, FHWA has three focus crash areas: roadway departures, intersections, bicycles, and pedestrians. The reason that roadway departures is a major emphasis and the state's got a safety action plan is that about half of all the fatalities occur due to people leaving their lane, going up the side of the road, or going into the other lane and having a head-on or a side swipe. So that's why that's the primary focus. But we're not saying intersections, bicycles, and pedestrians aren't important. They are. They're also a major focus area because intersections, we have a lot of crashes, and bicycles and pedestrians, anybody outside of a vehicle is a vulnerable road user, and they're much more likely to be hurt. Now, I'm going to show you a video. Before I start it, I just want to tell you, all we have here is a broken arm, a level B injury. Surprisingly, it could have been a lot worse, and it's a classic example of two wrongs don't make a right. Okay? This person is walking against the walk signal. Somebody goes through a red light, and we get a situation that could have been a lot worse. Okay? So we do want to make sure we don't forget about intersections, we don't forget about vulnerable road users, but this is the reason, that we have focus areas. Now, when it comes to crash factors, we look at the vehicle, we look at the highway, and we look at human factors. And if you sort of think about this as either a Venn diagram or a pie chart, you can actually sort of see that the vehicle is part of the issue. And we'll talk more about the vehicle. By itself, not much. About 3% of the time, it's just something's wrong with the vehicle and that leads to the serious crash. The highway, again, by itself, is usually not a serious, by itself is an issue, though we could do better because about a third of the time, the highway is part of the equation. Human factors is by far the biggest issue. About 60% of the time, it's just the human factors, and almost 93%, and those numbers vary slightly from year to year, and different people say different things, but over 90% of the time, there's a human factor involved. Now, the thing I want you to realize, there's people who go, well, I can't do anything about it because it's human factors. There's actually a lot of things we can do, and let's talk a little bit about these crash factors, and we'll start with the vehicle. Now, obviously, we have some vehicles that we don't like them anymore, okay? The old Pinto where you hit it just the right way, the gas tank would go boom. And then there's the Corvair that Ralph Nader famously said was unsafe at any speed. We're not talking about that really as much as we're talking about if you don't maintain the vehicle, if you don't have good tires, good brakes, maintain proper systems, that's a vehicle problem, but that's really a human factors problem in a lot of ways. Well, we're trying to be penny wise, pound foolish. That's part of the reason people are putting in all of the effort to try to make automated systems to improve the safety of vehicles, though we know they're not going to solve problems 100%. But they're trying to help overcome some of the human factors. Now, in terms of human factors, as we're doing our traffic improvements, think about what we're dealing with humans. In a lot of ways, we're dealing with three major issues. We're dealing with their expectations, we're dealing with the fact there's a lack of attention, and their vision. And I say vision, but we really should say it's senses, because that includes their hearing, their feeling. Those can make a difference, like in a rumble strip. The feeling maybe is important as what they see. Okay? But whatever we've got, perception is reality. This is a cartoon that talks about people being focused on their phones, and I've seen it, trust me, on campus here. But there's actually a sign in Europe that says the same thing. Is that aimed at the driver or is that aimed at the people walking? We can debate that, but we have to deal with the reality of human factors. It's part of the equation, so we can think about that. So, in the Q&A for me, tell me, what is the most important sign at this intersection? What's the most important sign? Throw that in the Q&A for me. Let's see what we get. What's the most important sign? Ah, somebody got it in the first try. Oh, we got a whole bunch of people getting it. Yeah, that's good. Let's see if anybody else got a different answer. Nope, everybody found it. And somebody put all. And can't disagree with you, but this is actually a problem we know about. It's called sign pollution. You get so many signs so close to each other that you don't know what the important sign is. If you're trying to go skiing, yeah, you'd like to know where Whiteface Mountain is and the ski resorts and things like that. But if you're trying to find the hospital, yeah, that's pretty important. And this old picture breaks people's expectations because the color of a hospital sign, we expect it to be this color right here, white on blue. In fact, that sign used to be a legal sign. It's not anymore. The current standards require that sign to be this color, white on blue, because that's expectations. We don't want to break people's expectations. That leads to problems. Okay? So everybody catch what that said? Everybody see that? What did that just say? See if everybody in the Q&A can tell me what that sign just said. Our markings. Oh, somebody even typed it in the right way. They noticed it was misspelled, but your brain sees that it says school. Okay? Your brain, the expectation is, I see those letters, I see school, even though it's Shakul. I think that's the school where Shaquille O'Neal's kids go to. Expectation, we can actually take advantage of that. People expect certain things. If we don't break those expectations, we can actually improve things above and beyond. So keep that in mind. Now, the other one is attention. I'm going to show you a video. Okay, you ready? Here's the video. Okay, it's an awareness test. This is out of the United Kingdom. Uh, I want you to tell me how many passes does the team in white make? So ready? Get ready. Here we go. How many teams? Watch and count. Count the number of passes that you've got there. Okay. Count the number of passes. Okay. And it stalls a little bit with good old internet connections. Did you get 13? Raise your hand if you got 13. How many have you got 13? Let's see. How many have you got 13? Okay, just a few of you got 13. Now watch, I'm going to lower all your hands. How many of you saw the bear? Raise your hand if you saw the moonwalking bear. Okay, here we go. We'll start back up. Watch carefully. When you see it, raise your hand. There it goes. Yeah. It's actually an experiment that's been done for many years. This is a PSA out of England talking about bicyclists. Um, we know people don't see bicycles and motorcycles as well. Their expectations are that they're watching for cars and trucks. And it doesn't help that people aren't always paying attention, that they're, well, let's just say, focused on other things. Like if you've got your cell phone in your hand, you're adding 5 seconds to the time it takes for you to react. That's adding 5 seconds. So we really want to think about that combination of attention and expectation and dealing with human factors, what we've got. Okay? And then, of course, there's your senses, things that you see. Um, this looks like it's moving to most people. It's not. It's an optical illusion. It's perfectly still. Your brain is making it move. Much in the same way that if you're on a bicycle or a motorcycle, you see a single light, you don't think that's a car. You don't even see it. We can be fooled with traps for alignments and things like that. So think about the human factors. And let's talk a little bit about that as we talk about the highway. Now, when it comes to the highway, there's lots of things we can do. There's lots of good information out there about geometry and traffic control. And of course, it's going to vary depending upon whether we've got a low volume road or a high volume road, an arterial, like collector, things like that. You know, this road right here is certainly serving the needs of the people who are using it, even though you certainly wouldn't want this on a road with 10,000 vehicles a day. We should be designing and building the roads to deal with what people actually use, at the same time thinking about ways we can improve safety. And little things can make a big difference. So for instance, this is an intersection in Ithaca where they put in a mini roundabout. Now, I will tell you, there are people who hate both mini and regular size roundabouts. They hate them with a passion. But they actually work and they reduce the number of serious and fatal crashes quite a bit. And they can actually change the character of a neighborhood or a community. And you can actually take advantage of that because you're giving people notice. It says, hey, you're in an area where we don't expect high speeds. We're in an area where we want you looking around for those bicyclists and the pedestrians and the vulnerable road users. But again, as you're doing this, as an engineer or a manager or a superintendent, think about other vehicles, the snowplow, the fire truck, and make sure you've accommodated for them as well. It's a balancing act. And there's no perfect answer out there. If there was, trust me, I'd have it on the list. We need to make sure that our curves are properly super elevated. This is a huge improvement in safety because that banking of the roadway, much like you see at the NASCAR tracks, is going to improve safety because it allows the vehicle to go around a little bit higher speed, less chance of a crash. But obviously, we don't want that super elevation to be too great, especially in snowy areas. And yes, we're supposed to get some snow. In fact, I see in the forecast there's some snow, at least in the North Country, coming up later this week. But we're going to have super elevation. That's part of the analysis, part of the design. We need to think about our intersections. And again, put your brain back, think about the human factors issues. If you've got a sharp angle like you see here, you've got three roads all coming together, and rather than having a single intersection, it's three mini intersections. It can be very hard for someone to turn their head and see around the corner. So what is their expectations? What are people actually looking for? Someone coming up to the stop sign is going to have to look back over their shoulder, and they're going to have a hard time sometimes seeing if there's traffic coming. So again, this actually may lead to more crashes. Your vertical alignments are going to make a difference. We're certainly going to have different vertical alignments for a low volume road versus a high volume road. We certainly in rural areas, mountainous areas, may have to just deal with the fact the roads are going to be a little bit steeper. What's the minimum and maximum grade? Well, that's probably going to be part of your standards, and it's something to think about. But realize who's using the road. You know, it's going to be difficult for this horse and buggy to get up the road. Oh, and by the way, a school bus stops on this road at the driveway you see there, or at least it did when the photograph was taken. So keep these kind of things in mind. Now, the combination of horizontal and vertical alignment is one that we don't always think about. It's in the standards, but we probably don't think about it because most of our roads already exist. We aren't building a lot of new roadways. But as you're looking at your roads, think about that vertical alignment. If you're coming over a hill and you're going around a corner, you can actually have a visual trap where you don't see the road. You don't realize it's going and turning away. So that's why signs and markings and delineation is so critical. And that's why, again, we're doing a special webinar on curbs on Thursday. Okay? Now, almost all of the stuff that we're doing in terms of traffic safety for engineering side of the house comes back to stopping sight distance. Okay? And so that's the distance in feet or meters, if you want to do it in meters, between when the person sees something they have to stop before they hit it and when they actually can stop. And so that includes three components. It includes their relative height, and we assume about 3.5 feet, someone in a car, though we know trucks are higher. We assume the object they're going to hit is about 2 feet, that's, say, the back end of a bumper. And then we have to worry about not only the vehicle stopping, but how long does it take for someone to put their foot on the brake? Okay? That's the reaction time. Now, most people's reaction times are under a second and a half or something they're not aware of, and they suddenly have to make a decision. But we actually design around 2.5 seconds because we want to include people whose reactions might be a little slower, either due to inexperience or as the people get older, the reaction times go up. So we use 2.5 seconds typically. But remember, you're on that cell phone, I already told you, you're adding about 5 seconds to your reaction time, so your distance is a lot further. Because at 30 miles an hour, that's 45 feet a second. At 60 miles an hour, that's 90 feet a second. I know, technically it's 88, but 1.5 I can do in my head. So keep these things in mind. Now, when I was in school, we learned about the 4 E's. The 4 E's were sort of the mantra of how we're going to make things safer with doing good education. We're going to do some engineering. We're going to have some enforcement. And then we keep adding and subtracting other E's. But the one everybody seems to have agreed upon is emergency response. If we can get to someone in the golden hour and get them good medical care, their chances of walking away without a long-term problem or a fatal goes way, way up. So we really want to get there within, 30 minutes or less would be even better. So the idea is these 4 E's, okay? And we were focused on the engineering because that's what we were taught, right? Now, in terms of geometric standards, you should have geometric standards. Raise your hand if your agency has geometric standards you've adopted. Raise your hand. Let's see how many people raise their hand. Even if you work in a consulting firm, you probably should know some geometric standards. You should adopt something because if you don't adopt a set of standards and a crash occurs and you go to court, you may be held to somebody else's standards. And let's be honest, that dirt road I showed you earlier, it wouldn't meet the standards for the AASHTO Green Book, actually. It's too narrow, okay? New York State has adopted something they call the Highway Design Manual. It is pretty much the AASHTO Green Book with a few caveats for New York. Makes perfect sense. But again, that's for higher volume roadways. By the way, if you ever want to know why it's called a Green Book, there used to be a yellow book and a blue book for rural and urban areas. When they combined them, it became green. That's where the name comes from. There is another set of standards out there. It's called the AASHTO Low Volume Standard. And it's the guidelines for geometric design of low volume roads. It was first put out around 2001. They updated it in 2019, and it is actually valid up to about 2,000 vehicles a day, with a few caveats, a few things that are missing because it's a relatively thin document, but it is closer to how we actually build and design roadways. Now, you could do your own locally developed system. We actually have a set of standards you could use as a starting point, though I'll admit it pulls a lot from these other resources because you really want to have a set of standards that you can support, that you can follow, that everybody else would agree upon. That in court be like, hey, that's got some backup. And so those first three are ones that I would look at using and adopting. And again, about 2,000 vehicles a day or less, you can probably use AASHTO, low volume. Other than that, you really want to be using either the Green Book or the Highway Design Manual. And there are a few things missing in the low volume guide that you're going to want to pull from other resources. Okay? Now, that's sort of the basic introduction of traffic safety that we could have spent the whole hour on. But I want to focus on a few other things. I want us to just get a few ideas in our head and think about what we've changed over the last 40 or 50 years and think about where we're headed into the future. Because remember, as our former Associate Director Tony Rosenbaum would say, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you have always gotten. Okay? Now, there's others who said something similar, but the idea is we get in habits. We continue to think the same way, and we're going to solve the problem. Well, that's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. So let's think about a few ideas. Now, one of the reasons that bicycle and pedestrians and other vulnerable road users is so critical has to do with the fact that if you're not inside of a vehicle, your chances of walking away are dependent upon speed. Okay? So, for instance, and these were studies that were done, and obviously there's a metric actual number with this, but if you get hit, if you're walking down the road, and this is with adults, by the way, if you get hit at about 23 miles an hour by a car, then your chances of being killed are about 20%. Okay? Excuse me, about 10%. And your chances of being seriously injured are about 20%. Combined, it's about a third of people who are struck at that fairly low speed have a fatal or something really serious happen to them. If you just increase to 42 miles an hour, okay, now your chances of being killed is almost 50%. Your chances of a serious injury is going to be almost, not quite 40%, over three quarters, almost 80% of the time. You're going to have something that's life-changing. And that's one of the reasons why we really focus in some respects on work zones, because the flagger, the people who are working in the work outside of the equipment, they're exposed. Their chances of having a life-changing event are pretty high because they're exposed to a lot of people who aren't expecting a work zone. So that's why we really think it's so important to have good work zone practices. Now, if you get hit at 58 miles an hour, and you and I both know a 55 mile an hour speed limit, that's pretty much what people are doing. Your chances of being killed or serious fatal is pretty much 100%. There's a very slim chance that you really get lucky, but that's just it. It's a very slim chance. So we need to think about that when we're thinking about road safety and what can we do to reduce for the vulnerable road users on our local roads and streets. Now let's go back and look at our chart. Our chart says that it's human factors. And there are people who see this chart and they immediately go, nothing we can do. It's all human factors. But let me just ask you, and let's talk about this a little bit. What could you do about human factor crashes? What can we do as traffic engineers and managers to improve the safety, reduce the number of fatalities, reduce the number of serious crashes? So throw into the pool. Better signs and lines, absolutely. Better design. Education, yep. And we have to educate not just ourselves, and we do need to educate ourselves. We need to educate the public. We need to educate others. We need to make sure they understand what new things, how does roundabouts work? What are some of the new signal heads that are out there? So it has to be a multifaceted approach. You can't just do a single thing. That's one of the things we've learned. And don't break expectations. Good, clear zones. You might need some enforcement. I'm not going to say you don't have to have some enforcement. And try to have the system being more forgiving when mistakes do happen. Mistakes will occur, okay? Think about site distances. Yeah, there's some good things we can do. There's actually surprisingly more than you think, even though you're dealing with human factors. Maybe, for instance, you need to target some enforcement right after the bars close. That sounds like a minor issue, but it can actually be a major improvement in safety if you pick the right things. And we're going to go beyond the 4 E's here in just a minute. Now, safe stopping distance, we've designed roads for this for years. The current version of the AASHTO Green Book has added something, and it's called the decision site distance. I like this concept. It's a pretty cool idea, and that is that in an urban area especially, there's a lot of distractions. We're not even talking about people texting. We're talking about the fact that there's intersections and there's lighting and there are people walking and there's all these other distractions. So we actually increase the time before someone reacts. We actually increase a little bit the time it takes for them to actually stop because there's this decision that they have to make. And so the concept of the decision sight distance means that rather than having a stopping distance of 500 feet, in an urban area, you might be closer to 800 feet to give people more time to react, to make the right decision. And even in a rural area, you're going to increase things a little bit. So we pull back, but not too much. You don't want people to react too long, but it's called the decision sight distance, and it's in the current version of the Green Book. It might be something you look at, and we talk about that a little bit more when we're doing the all-day class. Okay? Now, I mentioned the four E's, and this is what we learned. The problem, what had happened with the four E's, and they're not bad, they're actually very good starting points, it became way too siloed. You know, we gave people driver's ed, we're done with education, walk away. We gave them, the engineers can do what they can do, enforcement does what they do, emergency response does what it does, and that's it. We don't talk to each other. We don't work together. And so in the last, about 8, 9 years now, um, Federal Higher Administration and others have said, let's look at a holistic approach. Let's look at the fact that we want everybody to get home every single day. And so they've come up with something they call the safe systems approach. And in the safe systems approach, we're doing some of the same things. We still want safe road users, and that means we're going to have to educate them as well as ourselves. We're still going to have safe roads. We're still going to have to do engineering. We're going to still have to do enforcement, some enforcement with safe speeds, but we can also design the road so that people tend to drive it at that safer speed. We actually think about the human factors. We, of course, are still going to have post-crash care, and we still worry about safe vehicles. All of these things are still true, but one of the bigger issues is we're going to focus on redundancy so that one mistake does not lead to a fatal or serious crash. So if somebody's driving down the road and they're going too fast and they get a vehicle that's got a little bit wobbly in the tires and they're well, let's just be honest, they're not maybe paying attention or they've got some kind of intoxicant in them. If the road does its job, then they might have a crash, but they pull off into a ditch. They don't hit something, okay? And even in the case when they get all the way through everything else, we still have that post-crash care that can actually surprisingly make a big difference. So this video is out of Ohio. It's over 100 miles an hour this vehicle hits, okay? And you're thinking, well, there's a fail. It's a serious crash, okay? It's one we definitely want to stop. And there were some things we could have done a little bit better with the rail system, but this person actually was able to be taken to a hospital and eventually recovered from all of their injuries. In this case, because they also got lucky that there happened to be someone with a cop who could call it in. That's the camera that you see, and they got post-crash care literally within minutes. Okay? So we want to have a redundant system that helps everybody out. Okay? Let's look at geometric standards. I mentioned the fact that we've got the Green Book and the design manual, and you can do your locally developed stuff. Here's the thing about standards, and this is actually one of those frustrating things. I'm going to lower all your hands. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want your honest opinion. I don't care the answers. I care the numbers. How many of you have had a situation where you've been asked to just meet the standard? We're going to build a road. We're going to improve it. We're going to meet the standard, and that's it. Yeah. Okay? Almost everybody has. But the reality is the standards are supposed to be the minimums. We're supposed to do better than the standards. And one of the things we've gotten into a bad habit of doing is we go, well, we met the standard, liability's gone, risk is gone, everything's good, but that's not how risk works. So what I want you to start thinking about is something known as substantive safety. The idea behind nominal safety that people have gotten in the habit of doing is we have a set of standards and it says lane's supposed to be 11 feet wide with a 4-foot shoulder. So I build to that and I'm done. My risk goes down. No, risk doesn't work that way. It's a curve. We have a standard as a minimum, but we want to think about doing more than that. And oh, by the way, if you can't meet the standard, there's the other myth, and that is, oh, well, I can't meet the standard, I'm going to do nothing, and doing nothing is okay. But the no alternative is not always the right choice. An improvement from a 10-foot lane to a 10.5-foot lane can improve the substantive safety, the safety for the drivers. Yes, it doesn't meet the standard, but it's still an improvement. And you can actually support that with your decisions if you've got good information, if you've got good standards, and you've got a good policy in place. So think about that for lane widths and radius of curves and stopping sight distance. Would we like to always be able to go with a higher design speed and higher lane width and all that? Yes. But improve what you can and don't always just stop at the minimum. In certain places, you want to go a little bit further. And how do I find those places? Well, that's the concept of systemic safety that we've talked about in some of the roadway safety series, and we'll talk about again. And that's the idea that crashes are a bit of a random event, okay? Now, you've probably seen this if you've been on one of these before, but just let's look at some crashes. This is the southern tier. These are fatal crashes over a 3-year period, okay? Just plotted them up on the map. And your brain says, oh, well, I see a couple of possible hotspots. There's one up near Ithaca. Maybe there's one down in the middle of the Catskills in Sullivan County. But when you actually start looking at the locations, the closest one's like half a mile apart, okay? There are still some hotspots, especially for the level B crashes and a few spots here and there. But for the most part, crashes are a semi-random event. And so just imagine rolling a dice and then fixing the problems where you get the sixes. And then you go, well, I've just solved my problem. That's not going to work because crashes are random. And if we wait till the crash occurs, it's too late. The idea behind systemic safety is we figure out where the most risk is and we fix those locations. And here's what's cool about that mentality. You can focus on the crashes, the critical locations, before a crash occurs. And if you've ever been in a public hearing and somebody's angry and they're screaming and they say, what do we have to wait for a fatality to occur before we fix the problem? You can actually say to them, no, we can fix problems before if you're willing to help us, if you're willing to support us in improving safety. Okay? So think about that. Think about the concepts of systemic safety and focus where you're at the highest levels of risk. Let's look at roadway departure fatal crashes. This is about half of all fatal crashes occur due to vehicles leaving the roadway, leaving their lane. The majority of the crashes are people overturning when they go off the road, hitting another vehicle in an opposite direction, or hitting a fixed object. And as you can see, the fixed object is by far the worst, but those three things are the focus of the roadway departure concept. And so there are other issues, but the primary things are overturning, opposing, and fixed objects. Okay? And if we look at these things carefully, let's focus on the fixed object crashes. And if you do that, you start realizing that, trees and heavy shrubs are 45% of the fixed object fatalities. I'm not saying we shouldn't do things about signs and poles and barriers. We should. Absolutely critical. We should improve where we can. But look at your trees. Trees are really critical. So here's some aerial overheads. I've set them up in the US customary for you. This is out of Sweden. They did some simulated tests. And watch what happens to the vehicles when they hit this tree. A tree acts like a fixed object. It doesn't, you don't think so at first it should be braced, but that's actually, trees are amazingly tough. And as you can see, at 55 miles an hour, not only does the tree enter the vehicle, it goes through the compartment where the driver is. The chances of walking away are zero. Okay? And in terms of tree fatal crashes, a lot of people say, well, they only occur in rural areas. And true, tree fatal crashes do occur about 2/3 of the time in rural areas. but they occur about 1/3 of the time in urban areas. They occur 2/3 of the time with passenger cars, but they occur 1/3 of the time with trucks and motorcycles and buses. They occur about half the time with posted speeds of 50 miles an hour or greater, the state speed limit, but they occur about half the time with lower speed limits. And they, of course, occur a lot in curves. So when you start thinking about trees, it's everywhere. I'm not saying cut down trees unless they're in a hazardous location. Trees in themselves can actually help calm traffic, but we want to have consistent clear zones. And what else can we do about tree safety? What ideas do you have for improving tree safety? Let's see what you come up with. What can we do about tree safety? We can trim them, improve sight distance. Yeah, clear them out. Maybe get rid of any brush. Remove them where they're causing issues. Maybe make sure your codes are up to speed. Okay? Delineate them if you have to. Replant with maybe smaller trees or put them further back. Okay? And where you place them matters. Get rid of old and problem trees. People want to save their tree, but a tree stump is just as dangerous as the tree itself. Okay? Make sure you have a good clear zone, especially on the outside of corners or places where people tend to run off the roadway. So, yeah, there's things we can do. Could we put up rails? Yes, but remember two things with rails, and we won't get into them a lot today, but we do have a webinar on it. One, the rail in of itself is a fixed object, and two, there has to be the deflection distance behind the rail to make it work. And everything is a balancing act. On a really low volume road, it may be better to just delineate. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about clear zones. And a good clear zone doesn't have to be as wide as you think. Okay? But a good clear zone can make a huge difference in terms of safety. So mark the edge of the clear zone here. And a few people have done it. I'm going to clear all your responses and make you do it again. Mark the edge of the clear zone. You can actually click right on it. What's the edge of the clear zone? We're all over the map. So the clear zone is defined as the area from the edge of the traveled way, in this case the white line, until the first fixed object or deadly object. Okay? A deadly object could be a body of water, by the way. In this particular case, let me clear all the buttons you've got so we can see the pictures. The clear zone ought to be the backside of the ditch because that's the right-of-way. And truth be told, anything inside of a ditch line increases its risk by quite a bit because a vehicle that does run off tends to stay in the ditch line. So the clear zone here is actually defined by that utility pole, possibly by the sign, depending on how the posts were put up, whether it's crash-worthy breakaway. But that utility pole is a fixed object. So we really want to make sure that we think about the clear zone as consistent. And again, think about the human factors. Think about a vehicle going off the road. You can actually run the numbers. And in this case, that utility pole, if it were up where the delineator is, the level of risk is actually about the same, maybe even a little less than if it's where it is now. Really should put it on the backside of the ditch where it's less likely to get struck. Okay? So think about these things. Within the clear zone, make things breakaway. Signs obviously is the primary, but heck, a utility pole could be made breakaway as well. So something to keep in mind. This is a single pipe holding up a sign. Okay, it's just I think it's a 3-inch pipe. It might be 2.5. I can't remember exactly without looking it up. Watch what it does to this Honda Civic. Yeah, there are lots of good breakaway standards out there. Now, do we need something as big and fancy as you see in this test, like you see on the interstate? No, but on the interstate, that's worth the money and it can save someone's life and has done so on many occasions. And in a rural area where you don't have to worry about things flying, you can just use a simple pair of nuts and washers that allow that vehicle to go through, and it's got a dent in the front bumper. So again, breakaway, crash-worthy. These are all things that we could think about, okay? Long before you put up rail, you want to think about getting rid of the problem and making sure it's crash-worthy, okay? You want to spend a good bit of time and effort on the curves themselves. There are lots of things we could do to improve safety here. But think about how vehicles track, especially around the corner. They tend to create ruts along the side of it, okay? So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Let's ask an honest question. How many of you have widened the asphalt or the pavement on the inside of a corner due to a sharp radius? Raise your hand if you've widened the roadway. So a few of you have. Okay, that's good. That's actually the standard, by the way. That's actually the standard. We're supposed to widen it anywhere from 2 to 4 feet. In some cases, a little bit more, but 2 to 4 is the more common numbers when you're going around a sharp corner because vehicles tend to track and you get rid of some of this rutting. Make sure you back up your shoulders. And by the way, if you use a safety edge, you could do that until you can get time to come back and fix the shoulders and really improve safety by quite a bit. So there are lots of things you can think about doing to improve traffic safety. And if we had the whole day, which, oh, by the way, we have a workshop on this, we can talk about some of these things in detail. Now, again, what we're talking about now is one of overall traffic safety. We've been doing a series of road safety webinars. We did combating roadway departures and local road safety plans. Last week was proven countermeasures. This week on Thursday is improvements at curves. We hope to see some of you there because we know that curves are a major point. About half of all the roadway departure crashes that are serious and fatal occur at those locations. And so if we can do improvements there, that's what we should be thinking about doing. Because the goal, remember, is everybody walks home every single day. So we make sure our rail is put up properly, we make sure our vehicles are in good shape, and we get rid of things that are substandard. Okay? Now, I've got a few PDH questions to finish our time together. And again, I can open it up to any questions that you've got, but let's go through our PDH questions. What is the name of the new FHWA approach to improving traffic safety? Everyone for themselves, safe systems, the 4 E's, vision, zero, or none of the above. And again, if you can't access the poll, you can always put it in the Q&A. Y'all are good. Very good. Yeah, it's the safe systems approach. It's a system. It's a holistic thing. We're not just looking at individual silos. Vision zero, you may have seen that, by the way. Vision zero is the concept that we're trying to eliminate. They say all crashes within, communities. But if you actually really look under the hatch covers, we're trying to eliminate all the fatals and all the serious crashes, and then we'll work down below that. Because the goal, really, we all should have, even if it's going to be almost impossible to attain, is everybody gets home every single day. We certainly don't want everyone for themselves, okay? So, we can do nothing about the 60% of crashes due mostly to human factors. Is that a true statement? Is that false, but only in highway geometry? But false, but we need a multifaceted approach. What do you think? Yeah, very good. Yeah. This is, again, it's a myth that's out there. It became a myth when we did that Venn diagram, because as soon as people saw it, we can't do anything about drunk driving. We can't do anything about distracted driving. We can't do any. There's lots of things we can do, but the question is, are we willing to spend the time, the money, and the effort to both educate, improve the highway, and think about the human factors as we're incorporating all of our safe systems approach? Okay? What is the most deadly fixed object? Guide rail, utility poles, trees, embankments, or none of the above? Always like none of the above. See, yep, trees. Again, I'm not saying get rid of trees. I think trees actually are valuable. They actually can improve things. But think about certain locations with trees. And rail and utility poles and embankments also are risky. They have their, you've got to look at those things, whether you need to put up delineation or rail or flatten the slope. These are all proven countermeasures that we can think about using in the right location. So let's now talk one last time about what does traffic safety mean. So let's see if we can think a little bit. What else does traffic safety mean beside what we've already talked about? What else? Protect the public. Everybody goes home. We saw that one. Should start seeing any new ones here. Safe property. Reducing harm to the public. Okay, I think there's one more old one. It was create a forgiving system. Yeah, here's the new ones. Yeah, a forgiving system. Educating not just ourselves, but everybody. And yes, uniformity. Oh, I like that one. That's really important. That's why the MUTCD has the word uniform in it, because consistency matters. And a safer system is better for everybody. And by the way, if you ever do benefit cost numbers for crash safety, they're almost always greater than one. But our job as engineers and managers is to explain to the public why we're spending their money, because they don't necessarily see that safety. It's hard to prove a negative. Okay, so that means we're going to have to do some education to make it easy to understand, to improve risk, to be systemic with our approaches, and to look for where the greatest risk is. Okay, multifaceted. Very good. Nice job. Okay, just as a reminder, our foundational webinar series is continuing, and the last of our roadway safety ones this Thursday. We're taking a break next week for the Thanksgiving holiday. So we'll see you in December for a few of these, and then we'll be taking a break for the end of the year holidays, starting back up in January. Any other questions for me before we say goodbye? Let's see. Anybody else got a question or two? Nobody has anything in the Q&A? Okay. A couple of thank yous. I thank you very much. Everybody have yourself a great day. Stay safe, stay well, and happy Thanksgiving if I don't see you Thursday. Bye-bye.